Are spirits born angry, or do they become that way when their final resting place is repeatedly disturbed? I'm not talking about the kind of ghost who died a violent death and whose spirit is forever trapped in the land of the living because of that violence. I'm talking about those spirits that chose to remain in their ancient tombs in the hopes of one day being reunited with their mortal bodies. Because we all know that's where they want to be, right? With their decaying flesh. But when grave robbers come along, does the ghost then become born of rage? Or if tourists start hearing strange whispers and one of them even passes out cold on the floor, does that anger escalate into murderous intent? Let's find out. Hi everyone, welcome to Spirit of the Week here at Messed Up Origins. Each week we bring you the most messed up stories from the world of the paranormal. And this week we are headed over to Egypt. Luxor is home to several royal tombs, and one of them is known as the Theban Necropolis. It's also known as the Valley of the Kings and Queens, and it's located about 3 miles north of modern-day Luxor. Between 1543 BC and 1043 BC, nearly 60 kings and queens were laid to rest here, including the great Ramses II, who had his tomb built in the 13th century BC. There is some debate as to whether he was the pharaoh who hosted the Israelites after their escape from slavery in Egypt as described in the Old Testament, but that's neither here nor there for today's story. That's just some fun trivia for you. The necropolis itself is made up of 2 parts. On one side are the tombs of the pharaohs and high-ranking members of the royal court. These are impressive structures, often carved directly into the side of the mountain with passageways leading deep inside. Then on the other side are the tombs of the queens, which are somewhat smaller, although still quite grand, considering these are the tombs of royalty we're talking about. This area of the necropolis is also where our story takes place. It was in the early 1920s when Howard Carter discovered the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun. It was also about this time that tourism really started picking up in Egypt, and soon people from all over the world were making their way to Luxor to see the great wonders for themselves. Most of them, of course, wanted to see the pyramids. But since the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, seeing the tomb of a real Egyptian pharaoh had become a big draw too. Soon, the Egyptian government was offering guided tours of the tombs in the necropolis. They even set up ticket booths so visitors could pay their entrance fee. And the guides were tasked with keeping order among the tourists and making sure they didn't stray from the marked paths. There were rules put into place to keep the ancient artifacts safe from sticky fingers, but also because no one knew what kinds of things might be lurking in the shadows of the tombs. That last part was never made clear to the visitors, though, who were instead told to stay on the path and not touch anything because the artifacts were very fragile. No one wanted them to be damaged because of some reckless tourist. So everyone abided by the rules, until one day when a group of tourists decided to venture off the path. That day, the guide led his group through the tombs, sharing tales of the past and pointing out interesting artifacts. He would tell them how the pharaohs believed that by placing certain objects in the tomb with them, they would have everything they needed in the afterlife. He pointed out jewelry, food, furniture, chariots, and weapons. All of these were meant to ensure the pharaoh's comfort in the afterlife. At one point, the guide stopped in front of a wall covered in hieroglyphics. He told the group that these particular writings were prayers to the gods, asking them to protect the queen in her journey to the afterlife. He went on to say that whoever prayed at this site was guaranteed safe passage to the afterlife. Of course, this was something the priest told the subjects to believe. But did the pharaohs really believe it? Was Queen Titi ever worried she wouldn't get into the next realm? The group stood silently for a moment while taking in the details of the tomb. Some of them took photos, while others simply stared off into the distance. And that's when it happened. A young woman standing off to the side suddenly swayed and fell to the ground. Everyone turned to look at her, unsure of what to do. The guide quickly rushed over to her side, kneeling down to try and figure out what had happened. The woman was laying on the ground with her eyes closed, and she wasn't breathing. The guide felt for a pulse, but there was nothing. She was dead. The guide immediately called for help, but it was too late for the woman. She had been fine just a moment ago, but now she was lying cold and lifeless on the ground before them. The guide tried to think of what could have caused this. Maybe she had a heart attack, or perhaps she had been carrying some sort of disease that took her life. The guide was a reasonable man. He had never seen a ghost, never heard one speak, and he certainly never seen anyone die from fright. So he decided that must have been what happened. The news of the incident spread quickly throughout the necropolis, and soon other guides began hearing similar stories. They would be leading their groups along the same path when suddenly they would hear voices whispering in the shadows. They would rush to investigate only to find nothing there. Sometimes the voices were sweet nothings or love songs, while other times they were screams and pleas for mercy. Now many of the tombs had been empty for hundreds of years, and no one had ever heard a whisper until now. The Egyptian government was worried that their prized attraction was becoming cursed, and they were afraid that word would spread and no one would ever visit again. They summoned a priest who performed a ceremony to bless the tombs and chase away any lingering spirits that may have been haunting the grounds. But it did little to stop the whispers. And then one night, one of the night watchmen saw something unbelievable. He had been hired to patrol the grounds after dark and keep any thieves away. He wasn't expecting to see anything other than the shadows of bats flitting between the rocks. So when he heard footsteps behind him, he froze. He slowly turned around to see the source of the noise, and that's when he saw the shadow standing in front of him. It was the shadow of an old man, dressed in what looked like ancient garments. The shadow seemed to walk with a cane, leaning heavily on it as it shuffled closer to the watchman. At first, the watchman couldn't move, but as the shadow came closer, he noticed something strange. The shadow was praying. It bowed its head and raised its hands in what appeared to be a prayer of thanks, and then it continued on its way, leaving the watchman frozen in place. He blinked and shook his head, trying to get rid of the image. Had he really just seen a ghost? Perhaps. But why did it appear to him and not the daytime tourists? And why did it seem so peaceful if it was a ghost of someone who died violently? And what about the woman who had fallen down dead on the floor? Was that the work of a ghost or something more sinister? Some say that the ghosts of those buried in the tombs don't take kindly to visitors and will punish them for daring to enter their sacred space. While investigating the whispers in the tombs, one of the guides stumbled upon a secret passageway hidden behind one of the walls. Inside the passageway, he found something shocking. It was full of treasures, gold coins, jewels, necklaces, rings and scarabs, all kinds of riches. It was obvious that whoever hid them here didn't plan on ever coming back for them. The guide immediately called for backup, and soon authorities arrived to collect the items, but no one knows who hid the treasure or why. However, many believe it was the work of grave robbers. After all, the tombs had been disturbed, and many of the artifacts were missing. Perhaps they were taken by grave robbers who planned on returning later to steal more. But what if the spirits of the necropolis don't allow that? What do you think happened to the woman? Do you think she was killed by a ghost or by grave robbers? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button and share this with a friend. Subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified every time we upload a new episode. And as always, I'll see you next week.